The click was so small. That was the part Eli would think about later, lying in the dark with rain tapping its fingers against the skylight above his bed, a sound he had come to love, the way you loved things that were once frightening and are now just weather. Such a small sound, the click of a car door locking, the kind of sound you pass through 100 times in a life and register as nothing, as background, as the world going about its ordinary business of closing and opening and closing again. But in that moment, standing outside himself slightly, the way very tired people sometimes do, with the overhead light dying as the door sealed shut behind him and the storm throwing itself against the windows in great gray walls, and the warmth of the car pressing around him like something he hadn't been inside in a very long time. That click settled into Eli Cole's chest and stayed there. He did not realize, not yet, that he was in the wrong car. He had approximately 4 seconds before that became impossible to ignore. The rest stop at Millhaven Junction had been chaos. An early October system dropping temperatures 20 degrees in the space of an hour, hail coming down with the specific viciousness of weather that has decided to make a point, and somewhere between 40 and 60 cars all making the same calculation at the same time. Shelter, now, wherever you can find it. Eli had been running, his overnight bag over his head as a shield that helped almost not at all. His vision narrowed to the gray middle distance and the shape of the dark SUV he was fairly certain he'd clicked open with his key fob from 30 feet away. Fairly certain. He had been driving for 6 hours. His hands had gone numb somewhere around the Stevens Pass summit. He hadn't eaten since the breakfast his sister had pressed on him at 7 in the morning. A bowl of oatmeal with sliced banana that he'd eaten standing at her kitchen counter while her new daughter slept in the bassinet 6 feet away, one tiny fist curled against her cheek, the perfect self-contained architecture of new life. He pulled the car door open, threw himself inside, pulled it shut behind him, and breathed. The smell was wrong. His car smelled of the bergamot diffuser he kept on the dash, and the particular clean dryness of a vehicle that got vacuumed every 2 weeks, because Eli had very few indulgences, and a clean car was one of them. This car smelled of cedar, and something underneath that he could not immediately name. Something that sat at the back of the throat, something that felt absurdly and inexplicably like the first note of a word for which he had lost the translation. He registered this information at the same precise moment he registered that there was someone in the driver's seat, that there was someone in the passenger seat, that there was someone in the back seat beside him, that all three someones were very still and all three someones were looking at him. He turned his head with the particular slowness of a man whose nervous system was firing faster than his body wanted to move. The man in the driver's seat was watching him in the rearview mirror. So dark eyes, the color of deep water, entirely unreadable in the way that certain people are unreadable because they have made stillness into a discipline rather than a reflex. The man in the passenger seat had turned fully in his seat to face the back of the car and was looking at Eli with an expression that was not alarmed and not amused, and was instead something more precise than either evaluation. The specific and unhurried quality of someone who has encountered an unexpected variable and is deciding, calmly and without drama, what to do about it. And in the back seat beside him, close enough that Eli could feel the warmth radiating from him in the specific way warmth radiates from another body and from nothing else, a third man was watching him with something that was neither evaluation nor stillness, something that looked, against all probability given the circumstances, like concern. They were identical, or nearly. The same architecture of bone, the same particular spacing of the eyes, the same mouth that managed to read differently on each face while being, beneath the surface, undeniably the same. Triplets, Eli understood, with some detached part of his brain that had kept functioning. He was in the wrong car in a storm with 3 identical strangers, and the doors were locked, and the silence was the loudest thing he had encountered in recent memory. "I think," he said, and his voice came out smaller than he intended, which was a thing that happened to Eli more often than he would have liked, his voice defaulting to something that apologized before the sentence did. I think I may have gotten in the wrong car. The man in the driver's seat said nothing. His eyes moved from Eli's face to the violence outside the window and back to Eli's face. The man in the passenger seat said, "Yes." The man beside him said, "You're soaked through." He said it the way a doctor notes a symptom, without judgment, with attention. Eli's hand went to the door handle behind him, pulled, nothing. Pulled again with more intention. The lock held. The child lock or the electric system or whatever physics was in charge here had already done the calculation that opening a car door into 50-mile-an-hour winds and horizontal hail was not a viable outcome, and had made that decision on his behalf before he'd thought to make it himself. He was locked in. His heart did something complicated. "The automatic safety lockout," said the man in the passenger seat. He had already turned back to face forward, which meant Eli was looking at the back of his head, the dark hair slightly longer than his brother's, the particular set of shoulders that communicated a man accustomed to making statements rather than arguments. The pressure differential at this wind speed would take the door off the frame. It releases when the system determines the external conditions are safe. This was either the most reasonable thing anyone had ever said to him in a frightening situation, or the most frightening thing anyone had ever said in a reasonable tone. And Eli's brain, operating on 6 hours of highway and 1 bowl of oatmeal, could not determine which. He pressed his back against the door, clasped his hands in his lap, and did what he always did when his body wanted to panic. He started with what was true. True, he had gotten into the wrong car. True, 3 strangers had not reacted with alarm, anger, or anything that felt like threat. True, the warmth was real and the storm outside was not diminishing. True, his phone was in his coat pocket. True, he could breathe. He breathed. In through the nose, the way his therapist had shown him, back when he'd had a therapist. Out through the mouth, again. The cedar smell was deeper now that the door was sealed and the heat was recirculating. It was not a product smell, not the synthetic approximation that came in spray cans. It was the smell of something real that had been lived in and carried and was simply present the way real things are present, without announcing itself. It settled around him without asking permission. His body, exhausted and cold and running on fumes, responded to it before he could stop it. Something in the set of his shoulders going slightly less rigid, something in the jaw unclenching by a fraction. He noticed this happening. He disliked noticing it. He filed it. "I'm Eli," he said, because silence had a way of becoming a room, in Eli's experience, and he had spent enough years inside sealed rooms. "Eli Cole. I'm sorry for being in your car. I clicked my fob and I was running and I thought." "It's fine," said the man beside him. His voice had a quality that Eli couldn't immediately categorize, quieter than his brother's, or perhaps not quieter, but differently weighted, the way the same note sounds different on different instruments. Not gentle, exactly. Present was the word Eli kept coming back to. He was simply fully present in whatever he said. "It's a bad storm. You needed to get out of it." Callum, the driver in the mirror. Reed, the passenger without turning. The man beside him looked at Eli with those dark eyes and the edge of something that might have been the beginning of a smile, though it hadn't quite committed. Finn, Callum, Reed, Finn, 3 names sitting together like 3 notes in a chord that resolved. Eli stored them with the automatic precision of a man whose professional brain was trained to hold information in order because the world rewarded people who could keep track. "I have my phone," Eli said, which was not a complete thought, but was the most immediately useful fact he could produce. "I can call someone, or wait, or—" "You don't need to do anything," Finn said. "It will release when it's safe." "How long?" Callum checked something, either his phone or the dash. 15 minutes, maybe 20. The system is conservative." 20 minutes. Eli looked at the window. The storm was making no argument for compromise. He settled back against the door. as much space as he could reasonably create between himself and three strangers, and told himself that 20 minutes was nothing. He had survived significantly more than 20 minutes of significantly worse situations with significantly less grace. He thought about his sister, about the baby asleep in the bassinet, about the reason he had stayed 3 days longer than he'd planned, arriving on Tuesday when he'd said Saturday, leaving today when he'd said Wednesday. He'd called his office and worked remotely from his sister's kitchen table while she recovered from the delivery, while her husband managed the delirious new parent logistics, while Eli sat in proximity to the specific and undeniable weight of a new life and felt something in himself that he hadn't been able to name, only that it was adjacent to grief and adjacent to hope, and was not quite either. He'd been reluctant to leave. He'd stood in the front doorway this morning with his bag over his shoulder, and his sister, still pale and newly soft in the way women are newly soft in the weeks after giving birth, had hugged him for a long time, and he'd put his face against her shoulder and breathed, and she'd said, "You're allowed to want things, Eli." And he'd said, "I know," which was not true, or was not fully true, or was true in theory in a way that had not quite reached practice. He became aware that Finn was still looking at him, not obtrusively, not with the particular invasive quality of someone who expected Eli to perform a response to their attention, simply aware of him, the way you are aware of a window's light, not staring, not demanding, just quietly acknowledging the presence of warmth from a specific direction. "Do you want to tell me what you're carrying?" Finn said, "or would you prefer I pretend not to notice?" It was not, technically, a question. The flatness of it made it less like an inquiry and more like a door left open, which Eli could walk through or not, entirely as he chose. "That's an unusual thing to say to someone who just got in your car by accident," Eli said. "Probably." Finn didn't look away. "You've been gripping your own hand since you sat down. Not nerves, something heavier." Eli looked down. He had not realized he was doing it. His right hand was wrapped around his left wrist, a thumb pressing against the pulse point, a habit so old he'd stopped seeing it. His therapist, years ago, had asked about it once, and he'd said it was a grounding technique. She had said, with the careful directness he'd valued, even when it was uncomfortable, that it was also a way of holding himself together when he didn't believe anyone else was going to. He unclenched his hands, laid them flat on his thighs. "I've been at my sister's," he said. "She just had a baby. I was supposed to leave 3 days ago." He paused, editing, and then decided, with some impulse he didn't fully examine, not to edit. "I couldn't make myself go. She's 3 weeks old. My niece." And I kept thinking, one more morning, one more morning. Like I was charging something I was going to need on the road. No one said anything for a moment. The storm made its argument against the glass. "What does she look like?" Finn said. Eli blinked. Of all the responses he'd been braced for, that wasn't on the list. "She looks like she's receiving transmissions from somewhere else," he said, "like she's listening to something the rest of us can't hear. She has this expression when she's sleeping that is completely—" He stopped, laughed slightly, the surprised kind. "Sorry, you didn't ask for this." "I did ask," Finn said. Reed said from the front without turning. "She sounds like she has good instincts already." It landed like something matter-of-fact, and was somehow, because of its matter-of-factness, one of the kinder things said to Eli in recent memory. He looked at the back of Reed's head and thought that this man was either the most direct person he'd encountered or the most efficient with kindness, using the minimum amount of words to produce the maximum amount of effect, and that those two things might be the same thing. "You're a landscape architect," Callum said from the front. His eyes in the mirror were steady. Eli went still. "Yes." "How did you—" "Your bag. There's a drafting pencil clipped to the outside pocket, the kind that costs more than normal pencils cost, because the weight is balanced differently, and your hands have the specific calluses of someone who uses them precisely rather than generally. You sound like someone who notices things professionally," Eli said. "Development and construction," Callum said. We build things. It helps to notice what other people have built. Eli looked at the three of them with something that was sharpening from disorientation into attention. A developer, he thought, in operation of some scale, probably, given the vehicle and the quality of the silence, the particular ease of men who did not need to fill the space around them with noise to make it feel inhabited. He was used to reading clients, reading the texture of money, the distinction between people who had it and people who were made by it. These three had both. The money was old enough to be invisible, which was the oldest kind. "What do you build?" he said. "What doesn't fall down?" Reed said, and there was something in the flat delivery that made it almost funny, and Eli found himself smiling before he'd decided to. Outside, the character of the storm changed. Not softer, not yet, but different. The hail had passed. The rain came harder now, but with less randomness, less rage, more purpose, as though it had stopped making a point and started simply falling. The light in the lot shifted, gray to slightly less gray, the particular quality of late afternoon giving up the pretense of being afternoon and committing to dusk. Finn unfolded something from beside him. Eli didn't see it coming. There was no preamble, no negotiation, no verbal transaction. Just a jacket, dark gray, and as soft in the specific way fabric becomes soft after years of real use, held out across the space between them, not pressed at him, just held, available. The arm extended and the jacket waiting, and the understanding implicit in the gesture that Eli could take it or not, and that either answer would be received without commentary. He stared at it for 2 full seconds. He took it. The warmth hit him before the smell did, and both hit him before he could manage either. It was warm in the way only another person's recent warmth is warm. Not temperature, not the mechanical warmth of a heater, but something that had been held by a specific body and carried that body's particular heat, the way water carries the warmth of the sun after the sun has moved. He pulled it around his shoulders. His hands, without permission from the part of his brain that monitored these things, brought the collar briefly, barely perceptibly, toward his face. Cedar. Something clean under it. Something that registered in the part of him that was older than thought. He held very still for a moment. Then he set the collar down and looked at the window. Finn had already looked back at the window. He had not watched Eli take the jacket, had not made it something to be noticed or acknowledged, had given the thing and moved on, as if Eli's warmth were simply a fact of the world that warranted addressing, as naturally and as quietly as you'd close a window in the rain. Eli thought, when was the last time someone did something for me that didn't require me to feel grateful in a way that cost something? He could not find the date. He thought about Marcus, the way he thought about Marcus, the way you poke a bruise, not because you want to, but because the bruise is there and the instinct to know the edges of it does not fully extinguish. Marcus, who had loved him, Eli believed that still. In the way you believe things that were true once even after they've been complicated by everything that came after. Marcus, who had told him on a Tuesday evening in March 4 years ago, sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee gone cold, with the particular quality of exhausted honesty that bypasses cruelty and arrives at something worse, that Eli's needs were a level of emotional work that Marcus was not equipped to sustain. That being with Eli was like being the only person responsible for holding up a building, and he was tired, and he thought Eli deserved someone with more structural capacity, and he was sorry, and he did love him, but Eli had sat with the butt for a long time, had turned it over, examined its angles, tried to find the place where it was wrong, had not been able to, had decided with the methodical precision he brought to everything that hurt, and that Marcus had been honest in the way honest people sometimes are, which is to say useful and devastating in equal measure. He had spent 2 years after that, making himself smaller, needing less, asking for nothing, perfecting the architecture of self-sufficiency until it looked from the outside like contentment. He was very good at it. It had a certain austere beauty, a life that needed nothing, expected nothing, could not be disappointed because it did not presume. It was survivable. It was, in certain lights, even peaceful. It was also, he understood in the quiet of a car full of cedar and strangers and rain, the loneliest thing he had ever built. You've stopped, Finn said quietly. Eli came back. What? You've been monitoring yourself since you sat down. Something shifted a few minutes ago. You stopped. He looked at Eli with those steady dark eyes, the kind of eyes that see things and then decide carefully whether to say them. I just noticed. Eli had no response to that. He had no response because it was true and because being seen accurately and without agenda was a sensation he had forgotten the texture of, and it was hitting him somewhere without adequate defenses. We have a house at Carver Lake, Callum said from the front. His voice was even, but Eli had the sense that the announcement was not unrelated to what Finn had just said, that there was a logic operating between these three men that did not require being spoken. We go every October. The lake in the fall is worth the drive. Finn mentioned something about leaves and fire, Eli said, and then realized he had revealed that he'd been listening more carefully than people usually admitted to and looked at the window. He shows everyone that image eventually, Reed said, and his tone was not unkind, only precise. It's accurate, Finn said without defensiveness. It's accurate, Reed agreed. That doesn't mean you don't use it too often. The almost argument, its brevity and its resolution, the way they moved through it without anything catching or snagging, the way people moved through familiar territory, gave Eli something he couldn't fully articulate, a sense of watching people who knew each other completely and had decided, with complete information, to keep choosing each other. There was something both comforting and painful about that. In the way things are painful when you recognize what you've been missing. The rain continued. The world was very small and very warm, and Eli was in the wrong car and the doors were locked, and he had stopped monitoring himself and did not know, in this particular moment, whether that was frightening or necessary or both. Tell me something about Carver Lake, he said, because the alternative was continuing to think about things that required more equipment than he currently had. Callum, who had been quiet for several minutes, said, In October, the elk come down from the high country to the water at dusk. You can hear them before you see them. The sound carries across the lake like something from before language. Reed said, The main dock needs replacing. Has needed it for 6 years. Finn keeps saying he'll redesign it and hasn't. I have the plans, Finn said. I'm waiting for the right version. You've been waiting for the right version since 2019. Good things take time. Eli was smiling. He couldn't help it. The specific domestic familiarity of the exchange, the affection under the precision, the way the teasing was a form of closeness so comfortable, it had long since stopped needing to announce itself. He was watching three people who had managed, in whatever way people manage it, to remain each other's. What would the right version look like, he said to Finn. He didn't know why he asked, only that he wanted to hear the answer. Finn looked at him, that direct, unhurried look. It would extend further into the lake than it currently does. When you walk to the end of the current dock, you're still looking through reed grass at the water. You should be past it. You should be standing in the open. He paused. The end of a dock is supposed to feel like the edge of something. If it doesn't, it's just a plank over water. Eli thought about that. He thought about it with the part of his brain that lived in elevation drawings and sight lines, and the specific human geometry of how people moved through built spaces, the part of him that had chosen his profession because he believed, and still believed despite everything, that the spaces we occupy shape what we are able to feel inside them, that the right view from the right position could change what a person was able to believe about the world. You'd want the planking perpendicular to the shoreline, he said, not parallel. Most docks run parallel. It's efficient, but it keeps you oriented toward the land. If you want someone standing at the end to feel like they're in the water rather than over it, you need to break that orientation. Finn was very still for a moment. Yes, he said. That's exactly it. They looked at each other across the interior of a car that neither of them owned, and outside the storm was doing what storms do, and inside Eli felt something he had not felt in a very long time, and was not yet ready to name. The lock clicked. The same small sound as before, but different now, releasing. The light on the dash shifted from red to green, and Callum said, "Weather's enough settled." And that was all. Eli looked at the door handle. He looked at the rain, which had gone from assault to ordinary, the kind you walked through rather than ran from. He looked at his own hands, flat on his thighs, and was surprised to find them still. "My car is out there somewhere," he said. "4 spaces north," Reed said. "Gray Forester, you left the driver's side wiper at an angle." "It sticks," Eli said. "Fix the pivot arm," Reed said. "It's a $40 part." Eli laughed. Genuinely, suddenly, the laugh that comes from unexpectedness and can't be managed. He heard Finn exhale through his nose, something almost a laugh returning his. From the front, Reed's expression, which Eli could not see, seemed in some way to be satisfied. He reached for the door. "Eli." Finn's voice, he stopped. Finn was holding out his phone. Eli's phone, which he hadn't realized he'd set on the seat between them, which lay in Finn's palm with the careful quality of someone who had noticed it, belonged to someone and was returning it as a matter of course. On without flourish, without making it a gesture. Their fingers touched for a moment during the transfer. Brief, ordinary, the kind of contact that happens dozens of times a day between strangers, and that the body usually does not bother to record. His body recorded it. He got out of the car. The rain hit his face, and he stood in it for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the larger gray world of the parking lot, finding his bearings. His car was where Reed had said, 4 spaces north. The wiper at its stuck angle. Everything as he'd left it. He walked to it. He had his keys in his hand. He had his bag over his shoulder. He had every practical thing required to get in the car and drive north and get home and resume the careful life he had built in the precise specifications he had chosen. He stood at his driver's door and looked back. The dark SUV had not moved. Through the rain-hazed glass, he could see the shapes of them. Callum's hands on the wheel in that ready stillness, Reed's profile already looking forward, and Finn. Finn was looking at him, not through the window with the expectant quality of someone waiting to see what Eli would do. Just looking, the way he had looked in the car, with that unhurried, steady attention, the way you look at something you are genuinely curious about and are in no hurry to resolve. Eli realized he still had the jacket. He stood with the jacket around his shoulders and the cedar smell in the rain and his hand on the door of his own car, and thought about the last 20 minutes, and thought about his sister's front doorway and the weight of his niece, and you are allowed to want things, and thought about a dock that extended into the open so you could stand at the end of something and feel it. He set down his bag. He walked back. Finn had lowered the window by the time he got there. He was sitting with his elbow on the sill, face turned up toward Eli in the rain, and Eli thought, he's not surprised, which meant he'd been waiting, which meant he had believed, before Eli had, that Eli was coming back. "I still have your jacket," Eli said. "I know," Finn said. "I should return it." "You should keep it," Finn said, "until you have a reason to return it yourself." Eli looked at him, at the rain coming down Finn's face, which Finn didn't seem to find remarkable. At the quiet in his expression, the utter absence of performance, nothing being asked or bargained for or calculated. Just a door open, just the light on. "I don't know where Carver Lake is," Eli said. "I know," Finn said. "I could tell you." "You could," Eli said. "Or you could give me your number and I could ask when I need to ask." Something shifted in Finn's face. Not the smile exactly. Something before the smile. The thing that comes before someone allows themselves to want something out loud. He said his number. Eli didn't reach for his phone. He remembered it. He remembered the way he remembered the grade of a site survey or the specifications of a load-bearing element, with the part of his brain that stored things that mattered for use later. "Drive carefully," Finn said. "The shoulder drains slow after rain like this." "I know," Eli said, and then, because Finn had said something that was technically practical and emotionally not. "Thank you for the jacket for the 20 minutes. You came in out of the rain," Finn said simply. That was enough. Eli walked back to his car, got in. sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel in the quiet, the bergamot and the familiar hum of his own engine, and the jacket around his shoulders that smelled of someone else. He put the car in gear. He took the access road to the on-ramp and from the on-ramp to the northbound highway and drove into the dusk that had finally committed to itself, the last light fading over the Cascades to the west, the peaks going from gray to purple to nothing as the dark came down. He drove with the jacket against his shoulder. He thought about a dock extended into open water. He thought about the specific quality of being held still by a locked door and how different that was from what locked doors had meant before. He thought about, you came in out of the rain. That was enough. 40 minutes later, he took the Millhaven exit. His phone was in the cup holder. The notification arrived as he stopped at the light on Mill Street. A voicemail, not from a number in his contacts, and then he looked again, and it was, in fact, in his contacts, because 4 years of a person's number did not disappear just because the person had. And there it was. Marcus. The light turned green. Eli drove through it. He did not play the voicemail. He parked in his building's lot. He sat in the car with the engine, running for a moment that stretched. The voicemail notification sat on the screen. He thought about what could be in it, and the thinking was enough, was the full shape of the thing without needing to hear it. Because he knew Marcus's voice and he knew the register Marcus used when he was calling at night after enough time had passed that the guilt had worked its way through and become something that needed to be placed somewhere else, somewhere that was not Marcus. He knew, without listening, that the voicemail would say something true, something honest, something about how he had thought about Eli, how he hoped Eli was well, something framed with the care of a man who believed that caring, already expressed carefully, was the same as being a person who cared. It would not be cruel. It would be worse than cruel, because it would be kind in the way that opens a wound that was almost healed and calls the opening by the name of love. Eli sat with the voicemail on his screen and with the cedar smell on his shoulders and with the light in his apartment building 3 floors up showing in the window he'd left on, so he'd come home to something. He deleted the voicemail without listening to it. He sat for a moment longer with the weight of that decision, which was not nothing, which was in fact significant, a choice made in the direction of himself rather than the direction of what had always been easier. Then he picked up his phone, went to his recent calls, and added a new contact. 3 letters. Finn. He looked at the name on his screen for a long moment. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. The Millhaven street was washed and still, and reflecting the amber of the streetlights in long gold columns on the wet asphalt, and it was one of those quietly beautiful things that the world does when no one has asked it to, and Eli looked at it and breathed. He went inside. He hung the jacket on the hook by his door, the one that usually held his work coat. He stood for a moment looking at it in the hallway light, the dark gray of it, the soft from use quality. He made himself dinner with the particular focused simplicity of cooking for one when you are very tired, and also, underneath the tiredness, something else. Something that had not been there this morning. Something that did not yet have a name, but occupied space in his chest the way light occupies a room after someone turns it on. Not noisily, not insistently, just differently present than the dark had been. He ate. He sat at his drafting table afterward and opened his sketchbook, not to work, just to sit with it the way he sometimes did when his hands needed to be doing something while his mind worked on a separate problem. He drew a dock, perpendicular to shore, extended past the reed grass into open water. At the end of it, a figure he did not specify, just the shape of a person standing at the edge of something, looking out. He looked at the drawing for a while. Then he took out his phone and sent one text to the number he'd memorized. It said, "I kept the jacket." The drive was fine. He put the phone face down and went to bed. The reply arrived at 11:47, late enough that Eli was on the verge of sleep, but not past it. He heard the notification and lay still for a moment, deciding whether to look. He looked. It said, "Good." I was counting on both. Eli lay in the dark with the rain that had restarted, gentler now, tapping at the skylight, and felt the smile that moved across his face in the specific quality of private. The smile that happens when there is no one to see it, and it happens anyway because the feeling is real enough not to need an audience. He thought about a lake that looked like it was burning when the leaves came down in October. He thought about a dock that needed redesigning. He thought, one more week. Then he slept. He did not text Finn again that night. Or the next morning, he went to work and drew elevation studies for a client's residential garden in the hills east of the city. A commission he liked for its difficulty, a steep south-facing slope with poor drainage, and a client who wanted something that looked effortless, which was the hardest kind of thing to build. He made coffee and answered emails and ate lunch at his drafting table and at no point looked at his phone more than was reasonable. He looked at his phone more than was reasonable. The text came in the early afternoon of the following day, Wednesday. While he was on a site visit in light wind and the smell of turned earth, the good smell of soil recently disturbed and not yet decided about what it would become, his phone buzzed in his vest pocket, and he looked at it with the particular quality of someone who has been anticipating a thing while telling themselves they weren't. It said, "Tell me about the project you're on right now." He stood in a half-graded hillside and looked at those words and thought about what it meant that the question was not, "Are you free?" or "Do you want to meet?" or anything that required an immediate answer with stakes. Just, "Tell me about the project you're on." Just interest. Just the opening of a conversation that didn't need to be anything yet. He typed back, "A slope that doesn't drain. A client who wants it to look like the rain chose to do something beautiful on the way down." Finn replied, "Does rain choose things?" Eli replied, "The good designer's job is to make it look like it did." A pause, longer than the previous ones. Then, "I've been thinking about the dock." Eli sat down on a section of exposed bedrock and put the phone in both hands. He typed, "The perpendicular orientation. Yes, and the extension past the reed line. I pulled the survey drawings last night. The water depth at 15 feet out is consistent enough to anchor properly." Eli looked at the hillside, at the gray sky, making a study of being non-committal above the tree line. He typed, "How far out is the reed line from current structure?" 22 feet, maybe 24 in the eastern corner. So you need at minimum a 30-foot extension to clear it cleanly. At minimum, I've been sketching a platform at the terminal end, something wide enough to sit on properly. Something wide enough to sit on properly. The phrase landed with the specificity of a man who thought about how spaces felt to inhabit rather than just how they looked to observe. Eli felt the professional recognition of it before he felt anything else, and then felt the other things after. He typed, "Send me the survey when you have it." There was a pause long enough that he thought he might have said the wrong thing. Then his phone buzzed with an image attached, a site survey for the Carver Lake property, detailed and precise. Now the kind done by someone who took their built environment seriously. He sat on the bedrock and studied it with one thumb and the particular attention he gave to sites that interested him, the specific quality of focus that had made him good at what he did, which was understanding what a place was trying to be before imposing anything on it. He saved it to his projects folder. He did this without fully examining what it meant that he had a projects folder open on his phone for a property he had been invited to visit once and had not yet agreed to visit. He typed, "The eastern reed line is further from the current structure than the western. If you center the extension on the dock's midpoint, you'll have asymmetric clearance. You'd want to shift the extension axis about 8 degrees east to get a visual buffer from both sides." The reply came fast. "I know. I haven't been able to figure out how to reconcile that with a symmetric platform at the end." Eli thought about it, looked at the survey again, looked at the hillside in front of him, which had nothing to do with a lake, but everything to do with the problem of water and space and what a landscape asks of the person who stands in it. He typed, "You don't reconcile it. You make the asymmetry intentional. The platform angles toward the wider water to the east. You stand at the end facing slightly south of center. You're not looking straight out at nothing. You're looking at the place where the lake has the most room." He set the phone down and picked up his field notebook and began sketching in the margin of his drainage notes the rough gesture of a dock angling into open water, a platform that was not trying to be centered, but was trying to be aimed. The notification buzzed while he was still drawing. It said, "Can you come on Saturday?" He finished the sketch. He looked at it. He looked at the Millhaven hillside and the undecided sky and the problem of a slope that did not drain and a client who wanted it to look chosen. He thought about a lock that clicked open when it was safe. He thought about Marcus's voicemail, deleted, unlistened to, and the specific quality of choosing himself that had felt like something broken and like something healed at the same time. He typed, "Yes." He put the phone away and went back to work. The week had a texture different from the weeks before it, not dramatic, not obviously altered. He still drove the same routes and ate at the same places and sat at his drafting table until the light changed outside his windows and then continued past the light change because the work required it. But there was something living alongside the ordinary things now, something that occupied a small space in his chest with the quiet consistency of a pilot light. Present, not demanding, simply burning. He texted Finn at odd hours, not often, not with any schedule, just when a thought arrived that seemed to belong to the exchange rather than to his own interior. He sent a photo of a drainage solution he was proud of, cut stone channels that looked like they'd always been there. Finn sent back a photo of an unfinished room in the Carver Lake house where the ceiling joists were exposed and the light came through a gap in the unfinished roof in a single shaft that hit the concrete floor like something intentional. Eli looked at that photo for a long time. He thought, this man looks at incomplete things and sees what they're becoming. Reed texted once on Thursday morning, which surprised Eli enough that he read the message 3 times before responding. It said, "The highway survey I mentioned has the shoulder drainage data if you want it for future reference." Eli had not, in fact, mentioned anything about highway drainage, and the non sequitur quality of it resolved after a moment into something that was probably Reed's version of a greeting, or a door left ajar. He replied, "Send it." Reed sent a PDF that was 47 pages long. Eli read 12 of them before he admitted he was doing it because it made him feel tethered to something. Callum did not text, but on Friday afternoon, a package arrived at his office, which was unusual because very few people knew his office address. Inside was a book, a field guide to Pacific Northwest lake ecosystems, dense and annotated in small, precise handwriting that he recognized from the survey drawings as Finn's. A sticky note on the cover said, in a different hand, thicker and more decisive, Chapter 12. The elk come down at dusk. He stood at his office window with the book and read Chapter 12 in its entirety. Saturday arrived with the clean indifference that Saturdays have when you've been waiting for them. He drove south from Millhaven and then east on the highway and then off the highway on the county road that Finn had sent him in a pin, through the particular tall timber quiet of the eastern Cascades, where the road narrowed and the trees came close and the occasional gap showed glimpses of water. A lake set in the folded terrain like the landscape's private thoughts. Carver Lake was at the end of a gravel road that turned off the county road without signage. He would have missed it if the pin hadn't put him exactly there. He slowed onto the gravel and the trees closed behind him, the sound of the main road gone in under 30 seconds, and then the road curved and the lake opened in front of him and he stopped the car. He sat for a moment, just sat. The lake was everything Finn had said. It was in the one description he'd given, and also more. In October, the shoreline trees were in the last serious week of color, deep amber and rust and a red so saturated it looked lit from inside, and they came all the way to the waterline. Their reflections doubled in the still surface so that the lake appeared to contain a world below it that was the same as the world above, but more concentrated, more precisely what it was supposed to be. The light was low and directional. The air, even from inside the car, smelled of water and fallen leaves and cold, coming down from the mountain above. He thought, oh, in the specific tone of a person encountering a thing they did not fully believe until it was in front of them. The house was visible at the lake's northeast curve, a broad structure with a deep covered porch, cedar shake siding gone silver with weathering, windows that caught the afternoon light. He drove to it and parked beside a truck he recognized from the rest stop lot a week and a particular distance ago, got out, stood in the gravel with his overnight bag over his shoulder and breathed the air and felt the cold of it, and felt himself arrive, in the specific sense of the word that means you have come to the place you are heading, and you know it. Finn came out of the house, not running, not hurrying, just walking toward him across the gravel with the same quality he'd had in the car, that full, unhurried presence. And when he reached Eli, he stopped close enough that Eli could have reached out, and he looked at him in a way that had no performance in it, nothing managed or measured, just genuine, just glad. "You came," Finn said. "I said I would," Eli said. "People say things," Finn said. "You were always going to have the option to decide it was better not to." "I'm glad you didn't." Eli looked at him, at the lake behind him turning amber in the October light, at this man who had given him a jacket in a storm and asked him to come here and had not, in the entire week between, said anything that required Eli to be more than he was, or less than he was, or anything other than exactly what he was. "Show me the dock," Eli said. Finn smiled, the way he'd smiled that night in the rain, the private way, the genuine one. He turned and walked toward the lake, and Eli walked beside him. The inside of the house was something Eli absorbed in pieces over the course of the day, the way you absorb a place you want to understand properly. The main room had the ceiling joists from Finn's photo, the gap now closed, but the quality of light still remarkable, coming through west-facing windows at an angle that made the wooden floors appear to be producing warmth from beneath. A kitchen that showed the signs of regular serious cooking, cast iron C-zone to a deep gray, a butcher block worn soft at the center from years of use. Books throughout, not arranged but accumulated, the way books accumulate in houses where they're actually read, a long table that had been used for work, and eating without distinction. Callum was at that table when they came through, a laptop open and papers weighted down with a coffee mug and a flat river stone. He looked up. He nodded at Eli in a way that said both welcome and also nothing is required of you, a nod with a great deal of content. Reed was in the kitchen, standing over a pot that was producing a smell Eli's body received before his brain did. He glanced over. "You're here," he said. "Apparently," Eli said. "Good," Reed said, which from Reed Eli had come to understand was the full version of a much longer statement. He turned back to the pot. The dock was everything the survey had suggested, and worse and better. Worse because the engineering was clearly compromised, the main support structure showing wear that made Eli's professional instincts twitch. Several decking boards with a soft give of wood that had been wet too many times. Better because it was undeniably itself, aged into a quality that newer structures had to earn. It extended 20 feet from the shore and ended with a view that was mostly reed grass, exactly as Finn had said, the open water only partly visible. The horizon interrupted. Eli walked to the end of it, stood there. The boards flexed slightly under his feet. He looked at the reed line. He looked at where the open water began past it. He took his field notebook from his coat pocket and began to sketch, not presenting anything, just doing the thing his hands did when a sight told him something worth recording. Finn sat on the dock behind him and was quiet, just present, just there. It occurred to Eli, after some minutes had passed in this productive silence, that Finn was very good at being in the same space as another person without requiring that space to be about him, that he could exist alongside someone else's concentration without making it into a shared activity, without needing to be included. It was a rarer quality than it should have been. 8 degrees east, Eli said, without looking up. "I know," Finn said. "I've been standing on this dock at different angles for 6 years. Eli looked up at that. "You've been figuring it out." "I've been trying to figure it out," Finn said. "I kept thinking the problem was structural. It wasn't. It was directional." He paused. "That's usually how it is with things that seem structural." Eli looked at him, at the water behind him, at the whole of this place that was whatever it had been to 3 men for 12 years, and was asking to be something slightly different now, or large enough to hold something more. I'll draw you the full plans, Eli said, properly, not sketches, if you want them. Finn looked at him with that quiet quality. I'd want them, he said. The afternoon went the way afternoons do when you are somewhere you did not expect to feel comfortable and find that you do. He and Finn worked on the dock drawings at the long table while Callum reviewed what appeared to be acquisition documents, and Reed cooked something unhurried and complex for dinner. The work had an easy rhythm to it, the way collaboration does, when both people are more interested in solving the problem than in establishing ownership of the solution. Finn asked questions that showed he understood what he was asking. Eli answered them and found the answers changed slightly in the answering, which was the sign of good collaboration when the thinking of two people produced something neither would have reached alone. At one point, Callum stood from his own work and came to look at the developing drawings without asking. He stood behind them for a moment. He said, "The platform should be wide enough for two chairs, side by side, not angled." He went back to his table. Eli looked at the drawing, then at Finn. Finn said, "He's been saying that for 4 years." "He was right," Eli said. "He usually is," Finn said. "It's very annoying." After dinner, which was a lamb dish of reeds that Eli had 4 helping of, and then felt faintly embarrassed about until Finn told him Reed had once thrown a dinner party specifically to have an audience for that dish, and was currently glowing with satisfaction. They sat on the covered porch with the cold coming off the lake and the last of the evening light doing extraordinary things to the tree line across the water. Callum told him, without being asked, about the 12-year tradition. The 1st October had been the week after their father died, which they had not handled well separately and had not handled well together, but had handled together anyway, which turned out to be better than the alternative. They had come back the following year and the year after, and it had become the place where the 3 of them existed without the company they ran, and the decisions it required, and the performance of being the Voss brothers in the world. "You don't bring people here," Eli said. It was not a question. "No," Callum said, "but I'm here." Callum looked at him without defensiveness and without apology. "Yes," Reed said from his chair. Finn was not subtle about wanting to invite you." "I was perfectly subtle," Finn said. "You redrew the dock survey the night you got back from Millhaven," Reed said. 3 in the morning. "I heard you." Finn said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Eli looked at the lake and felt the warmth of what that meant move through him carefully, the way warmth moves through someone who has learned to be careful with warm things. He went to bed at 11 in the small room at the top of the stairs where Finn had put his bag. He lay in the dark with the window cracked and the smell of the lake coming through, and thought about the day, about the dock drawing on the long table, about dinner and Reed's satisfaction and Callum's one precise comment about the chairs, about Finn sitting behind him in silence while he sketched and making that silence feel like company. He thought about how he had spent an entire day in a new place with 3 new people and had not once monitored himself, had not once run the calculation of how much space he was taking up, or whether his presence was a net cost or a net benefit to the room he was in, had not once edited himself down to a safer size, not once arrived at the familiar and well-worn decision that smaller was better, that needing less was the same as being more. He had just been there, and they had been there. And it had been enough, and then more than enough, and then something he didn't have a word for yet, but that felt like the beginning of a word he had been waiting to learn. He slept. He woke early, before anyone else, and went down to the kitchen and made coffee and took it to the porch. The lake was in that quality of early morning stillness that is not peaceful exactly, but is very old, the kind of stillness that predates human presence and indifferently includes it. He sat with the mug and the cold and the color starting in the trees across the water and let himself have it, just that, just the morning. He heard the back door open. He heard Reed's step, which he already recognized by the economy of it, the specific efficiency of a man who moved with purpose and without waste. Reed came to the porch railing and stood with his own coffee, looking at the lake, and did not say anything for a while. Which Eli understood from their brief acquaintance was not unfriendliness, but rather the opposite, the willingness to share a silence without filling it. The dock redesign, Reed said eventually. What about it? Finn hasn't been able to figure it out for 6 years. He paused. He's figured out most things in his life considerably faster than that. Eli looked at the lake. It's a specific problem. Yes, Reed said. I know. He was quiet again. Then, he talks about design, the way he used to talk about things when we were young, and everything felt possible. He stopped, mostly about 3 years ago, after something that didn't work out. Eli looked at him. Reed met his eyes briefly, with that direct quality, the quality of a man who said what was true and expected the listener to be capable of handling it. I'm telling you, so you have context. Not so, you'll feel the pressure of it. The last thing Finn needs is someone who stays out of obligation. I know that, Eli said. I know you know it, Reed said. I'm saying it because, in my experience, people who understand a thing intellectually sometimes make different decisions than people who understand it fully. He went back inside. Eli sat with his coffee and the morning and what Reed had just done, which was something careful and direct and protecting of someone Eli was beginning to understand was worth protecting. He was sitting in the same place an hour later when the sound of Callum and Reed's voices reached him from inside the house, carrying through the open window above the porch in the way voices carry through open windows in old houses where the acoustics are imperfect and the distances between rooms smaller than they look. He did not mean to hear it. He heard it, Callum's voice low. You said something to him. Reed, context, Callum. He doesn't need management. He needs room. Reed. I gave him room. I also gave him information. Callum. What information? Reed. That Finn is worth the risk of it. Callum, after a pause. And if he decides it isn't a risk he wants. Reed. The same flatness. No emotion in it. Just the truth of the thing. Then he decides. I can't make the guarantee for him. No one can. He's built a very clean and careful life. Clean and careful lives are hard to disrupt because they're designed not to be. A silence. Then Callum. He came. Reed. He came to the car and he came here. The question is whether he stays. Eli sat on the porch with his cold coffee and heard himself in those words in a way that landed with the precision of something that had been aimed and had found, without intending to, exactly what it was looking for. A clean and careful life, hard to disrupt. Whether he stays, he thought. They are not talking about whether I am worth their time. They are talking about whether I will run. And the two thoughts hit him at slightly different times, one before the other in the specific order of a wound being touched. First, the old interpretation, the familiar one, the one that said too much work, too difficult, not enough. And then the second interpretation arriving a beat behind it, the accurate one saying something different. They were not calculating his worth. They were calculating his safety. The question was not whether they wanted him. The question, Reed's question, the one Callum had challenged but not fully dismissed, was whether Eli was going to do what he had done before, what the clean and careful life was designed to allow, retreat at the first moment of real stakes into the familiar architecture of not needing anything. Eli sat with both interpretations. He held them at the same time, the way you hold two different tools and feel the difference in weight. And then he put down his coffee mug. He got up from the porch chair. He walked inside and through the kitchen and up the stairs to his room and picked up his overnight bag. And the part of him that had been doing this for years, the part that had rehearsed this exit 1,000 times in 1,000 contexts, moved through the motions with practiced ease. He carried the bag downstairs. He walked through the main room without looking at the dock drawings on the long table, at the careful penciled lines of a dock aimed at open water. He went out the front door. He was putting his bag in the trunk of his car when he heard the gravel shift behind him. He did not turn around. He kept his hands on the bag. He kept his breathing even. He was very good at even breathing. He had spent years perfecting it. You heard them, Finn said. Eli closed the trunk. He turned around. Finn was standing 5 feet from him in the morning light. That was still the soft, early kind, the kind that didn't ask too much of anything. He was in a sweater and bare feet on the gravel, which meant he'd come out without thinking about practical things, and his expression was not alarmed and was not asking for anything. He was simply looking at Eli with that steady, unhurried attention that Eli had found over the past week of texts and this day and this morning to be the most consistently honest thing he had ever been looked at with. Yes, Eli said. What did you hear? Finn said. Not what did you think you heard. What did you hear? The distinction was precise and it mattered. Reed doesn't know if I'll stay, Eli said. He thinks I've built something designed not to be disrupted, and he's not wrong. Finn said nothing for a moment. He looked at Eli with that quality. Then, what do you think? Eli laughed slightly, the surprised kind. I think I'm standing next to my car with my bag in the trunk. You haven't gotten in yet, Finn said. Eli looked at the car. He looked at the lake behind Finn. The morning light doing extraordinary things to the water. The colors in the trees doubled in the still surface. The world and the reflection of the world, both there and both real. He looked at Finn's bare feet on the cold gravel, which was a small, specific detail that kept arriving in his chest with more force than its size warranted. The fact of this man walking out of the house without stopping to put shoes on because there had not been time. Because whatever was happening in this gravel drive was more urgent than practical things. Reed said a clean and careful life is hard to disrupt, Eli said. He's right. I built mine that way. I built it because someone told me that who I was, what I needed, the full extent of my presence in a life, was more than one person should have to manage. And I believed him, not because he was cruel, because he was honest, and I didn't have a good enough argument against it. Finn listened. And then I got in your car, Eli said, and you gave me a jacket without making it a thing, and I sat in that car for 20 minutes and didn't monitor myself once, and I didn't notice until it was already over. And that was a week ago, and I've thought about it every day since, and what I've been trying to understand is whether that was real, or whether it was the storm and the exhaustion and the fact that I hadn't eaten, and any warmth would have felt like that. And, Finn said, I came here, Eli said. I wouldn't have come if I thought it was just the storm. No, Finn said, you wouldn't have. But I'm also standing next to my car, Eli said. Yes, Finn said. You are. He stepped forward, not closing the full distance, leaving space just closer. Can I tell you what I actually think? Tell me what you actually think, Eli said. Finn put his hands in the front pocket of his sweater, the deliberate quality of a man keeping his hands occupied so they did not do something he wanted to do with intention rather than impulse. I think you are not too much, he said. I think someone decided what you were at the limit of and called that limit your fault. And you've been living inside that measurement ever since, trying to be precisely the size that won't exceed it. He paused. I don't have a limit like that. I want to be clear about that. Not because I'm making a promise about something I can't know yet, but because the thing you were told was a fact was not a fact. It was a preference, one person's preference for less. And you deserved better data. Eli stood in the cold gravel and felt those words arrive in exactly the place they were aimed at, not the surface, underneath, the place where the wound was actually kept, not in the memory of Marcus's words, but in the verdict he had built from them. On the sentence he had served without ever contesting the charge. You deserved better data. It was not a declaration of love. It was not a promise. It was something more precise than either, and in this moment, more necessary than either. It was a correction, delivered without pity, without ceremony, without the softening that would have made it less true. Just the thing, plainly stated, so by a man standing in bare feet on cold gravel who had come out of the house without his shoes because there had not been time to stop. Eli looked at him for a long moment. My bag is in the trunk, he said. I know, Finn said. I should probably take it back inside. Finn's mouth curved. That quiet smile, not the managed one, the real one. You probably should. Eli opened the trunk. He took out the bag. He closed the trunk. He stood with the bag over his shoulder and looked at Finn. This man with his bare feet in the cold and his hands in his pockets and his direct eyes and the whole of whatever this was, still in early stages, still without a name, still requiring everything that honest things require: time, attention, the willingness to remain in the room when remaining in the room was harder than leaving. He thought about a dock aimed at open water, about the place where the lake had the most room, about standing at the end of something and feeling the edge of it. Aye, the real edge, the one that meant you were past the reeds and past the cautious, shallow places and out in the open where things were deeper. I want to finish the drawings, Eli said. Today, while I'm here. Then come back inside, Finn said. Reed's making breakfast. Eli walked back to the house with his bag. Finn walked beside him. When they came up the porch steps, Finn held the door open, and Eli walked through it into the warmth of the house, into the smell of coffee and the morning light on the wooden floors and the dock drawings on the long table, and felt the door close behind him with a small, specific sound. He stopped for a moment. He turned. The door was closed. He had just heard the sound of it closing. He stood with that, with what the sound meant now, with the particular transformation of a thing that carries the same mechanics in entirely different meanings, the same small click of a closed door, one that locked him in against his will in a storm, and one that closed behind him because he had walked through it freely, because he had picked up his bag and chosen to come back, and the door had shut behind him, as doors do when you are inside something and it is yours. Finn was looking at him. He had seen Eli stop. He was waiting. The way he waited, without pressure, without urgency, just full presence and room. It sounds different, Eli said. What does? Finn said. The same sound, Eli said, depending on which side of the door you came in from. Finn was quiet for a moment, understanding moving across his face in that way it moved across his face, not showing and then shown, but arriving steadily from somewhere continuous. Yes, he said, it does. They stood in the entry of the house with the morning light and the dock drawings and the smell of Reed's coffee, and Eli breathed in and out without monitoring it, without counting, just the air and the room and whatever this was that he was standing inside. From the kitchen, breakfast is ready. There are 4 plates. Eli's is the largest because he didn't eat enough dinner last night, which I noticed. Finn looked at the ceiling briefly. Eli laughed. The kind that came from the real place, the unmanaged place, the part of himself he had locked up when someone told him it cost too much. It turned out it had been there the entire time, waiting to be given room. Later that afternoon, when the dock drawings were finished and pinned to the wall with the precision that Finn's architecture brain required, Eli stood back and looked at them. A dock extended into open water, a platform wide enough for 2 chairs side by side, an orientation 8 degrees east of center, aimed at the widest part of the lake, the part with the most room. He thought about something his sister had said in the front doorway. You are allowed to want things. He thought about how he had said, I know, which was true as theory and not yet true as practice. He thought about a week of texts and a day and a morning, and a man standing in cold gravel in bare feet because he had not stopped to put his shoes on. He was learning it now, not all at once, not in a single transformation, in the slow, daily grammar of it, allowing, accepting warmth without calculating its cost, staying, when staying asked something of him, walking back inside. It was the hardest thing he had built in a long time, and it was, unlike the clean and careful life made of materials that would not keep without tending, that required ongoing attention, that could not be designed to need nothing. He was beginning to think that was the point. The week that followed and the weeks after that were not a story with a single turning point, but an accumulation, the way trust accumulates, slowly and without announcement, built from the specific weight of particular things. Finn texting at 2 in the morning when a design problem was working itself out in his head and needing to say it to someone. And Eli awake and reading and texting back, and the conversation going an hour, two, past the point of usefulness into the territory of just two people keeping each other company in the dark. Reed calling him once, just once, to say that the dock drawings had been sent to the contractor, and the contractor had said the extension was structurally sound, and also that Eli might consider whether his engineering consultation deserved a proper fee, and Eli saying he would take it in dinners, and Reed saying that was an economically unsound decision that he would nevertheless accept. Callum sending him a photograph one evening with no text attached, just an image, the lake at dusk, two elk at the water's edge, and their reflections perfect on the still surface, and Eli looking at it for a long time before he understood that Callum had been waiting to send it, had been waiting until there was someone to send it to. November brought the first snow on the upper peaks. Eli drove back to Carver Lake 3 weekends in a row and stopped pretending each time that he wasn't counting the days between. The dock construction started on the second weekend. He stood on the shore and watched the framing go up and felt the particular satisfaction of a design becoming a thing in the world. And beside him, Finn was watching too, close enough that their shoulders touched and neither of them moved away. The first time Finn kissed him, it was not dramatic. It was late, and they were at the long table with coffee gone cold and the drawings of a project in Portland that Finn was working on and Eli had been offering an opinion on for half an hour. And Finn had looked at him at the end of a sentence and said, "Can I?" And Eli had said, "Yes," and that was the whole of it, as simple and as complete as that. And it was nothing like what Eli had been bracing for and exactly like what something real feels like when it arrives without armor. In December, the dock was finished. They drove up on a Saturday and walked out to the end of it in the early cold, the water very still, the mountains holding their new snow above the tree line. The platform at the end was wide enough for 2 chairs placed side by side, not angled toward each other, aimed together at the widest part of the lake, at the place where the water had the most room. They sat there for a while, just sat, with the cold and the lake and the mountains and the silence of a place that had been exactly what it was for a very long time and had decided, quietly and without requiring acknowledgement, to include them. Eli thought about a rest stop in October, about running from rain and clicking a fob and pulling a door shut and the small sound of a lock, and how the whole shape of his life had turned on that small sound the way everything turns, usually, on something ordinary that turns out not to be ordinary at all. He thought about a wound that had told him he was too much, and a correction that had told him the wound was wrong, and the long daily work of learning, in practice rather than theory, that wanting things was not a cost he imposed on the world, but a fact of being alive in it. He thought about his niece, 3 months old now, holding his finger with her whole body grip and looking at him with her transmissions from elsewhere expression. He thought about his sister's voice saying, "You're allowed." He thought about all of it as a sequence, not of accidents, but of arrivals, each one the consequence of all the ones before, stretching back past the storm to whatever it was in him that had run toward a car in a parking lot and pulled a door shut behind him and sat in the warmth of it and breathed. Finn's shoulder was warm against his. "Thank you for the dock," Finn said. "Thank you for needing it fixed," Eli said. Finn looked at him, that quiet, direct look, and smiled. The lake held the mountains and the sky and the small, precise fact of 2 people sitting at the end of something and feeling the edge of it. The real edge, the open water past the reeds and past the shallow, cautious places, and below them, the dock that had been built to aim at exactly this, at the widest part of things, at the place where there was room. If you have stayed with this story to the end, thank you. Truly. Stories like this one exist because you listen, and because you tell someone else to listen, and because you leave a comment or click subscribe and let me know that what I'm trying to give you has arrived somewhere. Tell me where you're listening from today. Tell me what time it is where you are. Tell me if this one found you at the right moment. I read everything and I carry it with me. Until the next story.